Good morning, class. This is it, the last chapter. And in fact, I just put this lecture together and because I have not done this in A&P before here at UNE. And it's a good one, of course. I put it into 4 kind of mini lectures so they're not too onerous. Reproductive system. This is unique among our systems we've studied because the other systems we talked about how they help you survive, how they work together. This system, you don't need to survive at all. You can live just fine without this one. You know, try that without a muscular system or a nervous system or endocrine system. It doesn't work. This is the one that really the only one that counts, actually, if you think about it. As I've taught you, you're all going to die. We all die. We are just here for a brief period of time on this earth. But this system allows us to make more copies of ourselves, our genes. So, very interesting. For instance, looking at these frog eggs, you know, a bullfrog can lay 10,000 eggs. Just to put it in context, how many of those eggs need to survive through the tadpole to an adult to keep the system, the ecosystem stable? It means that the 10,000 eggs, 9,998 must die. If they don't, we're going to be overrun with frogs eventually. So you can see competition, evolution is intense there. Humans, we give birth litter size of 1. Usually we give a tremendous amount of care. But we'll get all into that in a moment. So first of all, big picture with reproduction, and then we'll do male, then female. Then we'll get into miscellaneous stuff at the end there. So that is our plan. Well, just to make you think again, I like to do that, big picture stuff. Think of it this way, that when you look at the acorns in this huge oak tree, imagine for a moment that the acorns are just using the oak tree to make more copies of themselves. And yourself, think about your genes are using you, your whole body. And you think you live your life, you're all special. Oh yeah, I play the guitar and I can do calculus. All these things in your life are all you're just being used by your body to make more, by your genes to make, using your body, yourself to make more copies of itself. It's called the selfish gene hypothesis. And it's one way of thinking of things, that your bodies are just vehicles for your DNA to make more copies of themselves. So it's kind of good to put yourself in perspective for a moment and think that could be the case. Well, we look at what's reproductive potential. So a few years ago, I looked up, well, what is the record here? And it's one woman, apparently, 69 kids. Yeah, that's a lot of kids. But you can see is back in the 1700s, and she was quite fertile with the triplets and quadruplets and such. What about men? And this really brings to strong focus the different strategies of men and women. Because if you look at how the most kids a man has had, I found this guy right here. Yeah, it's an order of magnitude greater, isn't it? And indeed, men can, in one ejaculate, there's more sperm that would be half or all of the people in the United States. We're talking millions and millions. Women, 1 egg, and then there's 9 months of incubation, and then taking care of it, on and on. So men and women have very different strategies here. And generally, because of the difference here in reproduction, that men can abandon their offspring too, and their genes still get carried on. But the women have to carry it, take care of it, and have that burden, that the danger of not being able to run away, being pregnant. So there's a lot of effort going into it. More so in the female end, they're usually the pickier sex than the males. Nothing you didn't know, right? Yep. So different strategies as males and females differ. Now, another thing is that we have 2 sexes. Why not 3? Just 1. These earthworms out there on this rainy day today, they just find a mate a mate, anyone. And they meet together and they just exchange sperm. They both have sperm, they both have eggs. They're hermaphrodites. It's from Hermes and Aphrodites. It means they have both sex organs. And there's just one sex, but we have two. Makes things a little more complicated. And bringing us around to why do we have sexual reproduction at all? And there's books written about this, and it's really something to think about. Asexually is perfectly possible. All of us could just have our own kids and not need to pair up with another, not need to go through the expense and the danger of finding another one. We could just have it. But in fact, we have our DNA material, both the sexes, we put them together and we have a new combination. This individual child is not one or the other, but this shuffling of the genes, like shuffling of cards to make this new individual. But asexually, you can look at this sea anemone, it buds off, much like this hydra could bud off and make a whole new individual. One of the largest organisms on Earth is this huge grove of aspen trees. And see all the yellow ones there? They are all one individual that has just made clones of itself. Just shoots come up and it spreads like that. And among vertebrates, something maybe you didn't realize, but they're a group of lizards. You find them on this island and you pick one up. Oh, it's a female. Oh, another female. They're all female. There are no males in several species of these racer-like lizards. And when we look carefully, find out that there's only females and they just lay eggs. And the eggs are clones of themselves. They're identical copies of themselves. And in this case, they actually reverse roles. They do this like pseudo mating. There's nothing transferred, but they pretend to mate. And this has to do with hormones and it causes ovulation and such. But there's no transfer mixing of any genes. They all have their own babies. And I'm going to give it away, but the bottom line is, herpetologists like myself, we study these lizards, and evolutionary biologists, they find that they don't persist for millions and millions of years. They're very successful short term because everyone's having babies. They can have lots of individuals to saturate an ecosystem, but they can't change. There's no variation. A new disease, a new predator, that's it. They're all identical. Yes, I hate to be so harsh, but males, what do we do really? I mean, in terms of reproduction, we contribute sperm. It's tiny little sperm, a little bit of DNA, very cheap for us, as opposed to the female that nourishes and grows this new individual and feeds it for years afterwards, right? Well, decades. My parents still buy me dinner. Why not just be asexual? The males, again, they take up resources and space just to provide a little bit of sperm. I mean, not only that, the individual, if you're a woman and you want to have a baby, you've got to dilute your genes, your good freaking genes, with some other person gives you half the genes. So you're not even, fully realizing, leaving the most genes because you've got to dilute it with this mate. And you got to find the mate and woo the mate and go out of your house it could be dangerous, and if you're a praying mantis, it could eat your head off, right? So asexual is much more efficient. And if you look at this, called the reproductive handicap, indeed, asexually, everyone has babies. Sexually, you've got these males that are just wasted resources that just provide a little bit. So there has to be some benefit, or else this is a huge anchor, drag on our ability to increase our numbers. I think you guys understand why, right? You guys had biology. And you can look to the Red Queen in Alice in Wonderland, and it's the idea that the environment is constantly changing. And just to keep up, you've got to keep changing. And so if you are just making clones, if it's asexual, you only have your genes to work with. You can't mix things up. You'll never have an individual that's got some genetic makeup to make it immune to a pesticide or a disease or a new predator or global warming. The environment is always changing. And so sexual reproduction allows a variation of offspring. And natural selection and evolution can work on those variants and allow you to persist. in a changing environment. All right. Now, reproductive cycles, you think of most animals in the world is different than humans and primates. And we have a menstrual cycle. And we kind of keep it hidden when we're ovulating, and as opposed to, your dog going in heat, or when the deer, they're during the rut, they advertise, I'm ready, a short period of time, and then they mate. So a lot of animals are cued to the seasons, of course. Birds now will be mating, and then the deer mated in the fall, so they're going to give birth now in the spring. So environmental cues are important to a lot. Humans are different. We can mate any year, have babies any month of the year, and it's a different pattern indeed. So what we're really gaining here, the goal is to get a sperm and an egg of the same species together. And we'll see how the sperm will have enzymes on the tip of it that will dissolve this coat on the egg, and then the DNA can be injected into that egg, and it can find the DNA of the egg and make a new individual, diploid individual. And think about us, of course, we introduce sperm inside the female, but in frogs and fish, it's external fertilization, where in this case, these wood frogs, which are right here in Maine, the male will grasp the female lays the eggs in the water, and he puts the sperm on top of them. Just like you look at our trouts and our salmon here. The eggs are laid, you gotta behaviorally get the male right there so that sperm can be put on the eggs. But if you're gonna have an internal, keep your babies on the inside or lay eggs, you can't do that, because imagine you lay these chicken eggs, you can't lay the egg and then put sperm on top of the egg, right? So you had to have a way to get sperm inside the hen ahead of time before the eggs were shelled. Or if you're going to have live birth like us, the sperm has to be introduced. So with internal fertilization, what we do, of course, you need some kind of copulatory organ to get the sperm inside the female. And with that, once you get the sperm from the male, if you're a female, you can, some creatures store that sperm for years even, and they can use it when they need it. They can lay their eggs or babies across time. They have to carry the male with them to fertilize the eggs. So internal fertilization is what we do. And lastly, just to wrap this up too, looking at reproduction, is parental care. And those frogs, for instance, lay the eggs, zero parental care. Wood frog leaves, never sees the tadpoles, never helps, nothing. They're on their own, right? And then the opposite spectrum is us humans, where we give birth to one offspring at a time, usually, maybe two, rarely three and above. And we give it just tremendous amounts of care by feeding it and sending it to college and all these things that we do. Teach it to speak and to read. And so we have a tremendous amount of parental care on a small litter size. That is our strategy. Took ecology, there's two strategies there, the R and the K. We're K strategists. And if you want to be R, you just have tons of babies. Don't give them much care and let them survive on their own. All right, so this chapter, I'm not going to go over meiosis. You had that in general biology, you had it in high school, right? But just to remind you, you take diploid cells, the cells that make up your body, and in the testes or the ovaries, some of these will become the cells that make sex cells, which will be haploid, right? And so a little difference of male and female is that the males will make 4 sperm. The females will make just 1 huge egg, and then 3 little, called polar bodies. They just bleb off. They don't become anything. But allows the female to have 1 big egg, lots of cytoplasm. Remember, it has the mitochondria, everything in it. So 1 big egg, and then males will make 4 small sperm that just are vehicles to carry that DNA to the egg. All right. You guys have had testes. Turkey fries, I've had those. Deep fry anything, it tastes pretty good, but yeah, it's disgusting, I know, but it's food. So our reproductive anatomy, we're going to look at males and females. We'll see there's the external reproductive organs, the penis and the scrotum with the testes here. And then the internal, really the primary organs. The female will be the ovary. And then there's a bunch of internal organs in the male that help contribute to help the sperm survive. So big picture, let's start with the male. They're going to, reproductive system is going to make male gametes, which are the sperm, spermatozoa, sperm, and haploid gametes. They're going to make them, nourish them, store them, and then they're going to put those sperm in this suspension of fluids, semen with the sperm in it, and then reproductive system will get that sperm into the female. And also with both sexes, these ovaries and testes are producing hormones that are going to be involved not only in directly reproduction, but also secondary sex characteristics, hair and muscle development, things like that. Yeah, so in the male, making the sperm, mechanisms to get that sperm inside the female, and then hormone production. Now our sexes, we do start out the same. You can read some things here like the female is the default. You have a Y chromosome, there's a sex determining area on it that will steer these primordial organs towards maleness. And without it, you develop female features. And you can see that we call these homologous. So the clitoris and the penis are homologous, and the labia majora and scrotum are homologous. It means they develop from the same structures. They're just different sizes and shapes, but they came from the same ingredients. It's just under influence of the hormones, they will diverge into these two different anatomies. So yeah, we start out with this basic groove that's going to unfold, are going to turn into things that are just going to diverge in the two sexes. So testes, we'll talk about the testes first. And you can look up the word etymology, where the word comes from, and witness, it means a witness too, because you're going to testify, right? And there was some, I remember learning the Romans, only the males could testify in court. So they would check to see if they had testicles in order to be able to testify, and or they're witness to the sex act because they were right there. But a lot of this, again, it's unknown, a lot of the origin. So I don't want to just give that out as for sure, but when you see testify, testicle, they come from the same kind of Latin root. We have two testicles, and they're in the scrotum, which would be the sac of skin, and there's a wall, a septum between them, and one is lower than the other. Tailors that make pants know things like this. You can see the testes, they're outside the body too. Weird, vulnerable, words come to mind, but we'll see sperm production is better a few degrees less than body temperature. So indeed, the skin and the sac is the scrotum, and we'll see it has some muscle on it, and it's going to also have the ability to elevate the testes or descend them depending on temperature. And why they're outside the body, why they need to be a few degrees less temperature is unknown. I was looking into this. I read a paper where I saw mammals about 4 times independently they evolved to getting the testes back inside the body, like in elephants and their relatives. In rabbits, I believe the testes are in the body until breeding season, then they descend when the sperm can develop, and they come back in again. But testes on the outside are, again, very vulnerable. This is an area of you don't want an enemy to grab or to bite. Interestingly, bulldogs were flat-faced dogs were made in bullfighting to be able to bite the testicles of bulls. And yes, anyway, it's on the outside. There must be a good reason for this, and there's a lot of still mystery of why we need the testes on the outside. Well, they start out just below the kidneys, both ovaries and testes. You have to hear about the urogenital system. In a normal semester, I would have done reproductive anatomy with the kidney, but I mix things around and make more sense now. But this area by the kidney, part of it will become the testes, and ducts start developing early on. And then they descend. They descend down your abdomen quite a ways. If you remember from the arteries and veins, that testicular artery and vein or gonadal artery and vein goes a long distance all the way down because it simply follows the testes. It comes off by the kidneys. And the testes will descend. And you see by about a month before you're born or so, the testes will go through the inguinal canal to reach outside the body. I think I have another figure here. And the testes actually, they go through this canal, this inguinal canal. And in males, they can get a hernia there, an inguinal hernia, because this opening here where the testes descended through, if it remains somewhat open and there's pressure in your abdomen, you're really straining, intestine can push into that. It's called indirect hernia when it goes in there. And if it's tight enough, it can strangulate and cut off the blood and cause a lot of pain. So it's a zone of weakness right there for a potential hernia. And the testes takes a bit of that parietal peritoneum with it. It's a flat sheet, and the testes comes down and takes it with it. That's going to be called the tunica or coat vaginalis because it invaginates down. And the testes, so it goes from inside the abdomen to the outside of the body, and it's connected still. We call this the spermatic cord. Spermatic cord's going to have muscle in it. It's going to be your vas deferens. It's going to have blood vessels, and this testes has come down. And I like this word, gubernaculum. The gubernaculum is a ligament that kind of guides the testes where it's going. So in an adult, you have the testes, and the gubernaculum connects it to the bottom of the scrotum here. But it was a long ligament that guided it down like that. There we go. So interesting. This is what normally happens. But you can have cases where your testes don't descend. So the doctors will check that at birth. You can see pretty common premature. But 99% of the time they do. In a full-term baby, the testes have descended. And they watch it if they haven't, and if they haven't, they've got to fish them out and bring them down. If you leave them up there, you'll be infertile, and testicular cancer is a big issue as well if that happens. So they want to make sure they do descend. And it's called cryptorchism. Crypt means hidden, and orchid. I don't know if you guys looked at an orchid, but the base of the orchid looks like a testes, kind of looks like a ball there. There's the leaf. And so orchids kind of look like testicles at the bottom with leaves coming out of them. All right. The sperm are developing outside the body. Well, in the body, but in a scrotal sac that is hanging out in the environment. And it's got a membrane around it, kind of like the same membrane on your lungs or your heart. This tunica vaginalis. Tunic is a coat around it. And that was part of the parietal peritoneum that it took with it as it descended. The arteries and veins that come down go in opposite directions. If you remember that countercurrent exchange, I talked about how a duck or a goose can stand on ice and not freeze its body because it had arteries and veins going opposite directions, and it's a heat exchanger all the way up and down. So it's another way you keep the testes at a lower temperature by having the vessels parallel and going in opposite directions. There's muscles in the spermatic cord. So here's the spermatic cord. Again, you can feel it in a cadaver. It's got muscle in it. And if you feel in the spermatic cord, even guys feeling your own spermatic cord, you'll feel like a plastic tube in there, something solid, like a little tube. And that'll be the vas deferens or ductus deferens that's carrying the sperm up. The rest will be muscles and nerves and lymphatics and blood vessels around this muscle. And the muscle here is called cremaster. And that is going to raise or lower the testes. When it's cold out, the testes come up to the body, and the cremaster will pull the testes up. When it's warm, it will relax, and the testes can descend. So if you bring it close to the body, it's going to help conserve heat when it's very, very cold. And then in the scrotum itself, there's muscle that kind of goes every which direction, called the dartos muscle, and that will kind of wrinkle it up and also bring the testes up higher. Okay, so two muscles involved in the testes. The cremaster moves it up and down. The dartos will wrinkle that skin. This is the anatomy when you look at a testes. You look at a testes, if you dissect it out of the scrotum, you'll see it's white and shiny. And there'll be this tunic that is albuginea, like albino white. So albuginea is this white, tough, it's collagen, really tough, solid material that surrounds the testes. And then if you were to cut the testes open, it would look like little tiny tubes, microscopic tubes, and kind of like in little sections. And those tubes you're going to see are meters and meters of tubes that are producing the sperm. And then in the nooks and crannies around the tubes are cells that are making the testosterone. So here's the testes, and you can see separated into different regions there. And then the tubes that we really care about are these seminiferous tubules that are making the sperm. So seminiferous tubules are going to be making the sperm constantly from puberty on. And this, you can see it's in different sections like that, like kind of like an orange. And then they're all going to meet in this kind of complex area called the reedy testes, where eventually they'll come up these little ducts into this structure. I'll do it in orange, called the epididymis. So the epididymis is glommed on the side of the testes. And you can see the sperm are produced in the seminiferous tubules. The epididymis is a long tube where they mature, where they, the final stages, where they lose fluid, they gain their adult structure of a sperm. They can swim, but they don't. They can move a little bit. They're not like swimming that right there right now. But they'll go down from the head of the epididymis, down the body to the tail of the epididymis, which turns into the ductus deferens. Ductus or vas deferens, maybe you learned it as. So that's going to be the tube, muscular tube that carries the sperm from the testes up, behind the bladder to eventually reach the outside. All right, there's some anatomy taking a look at it. You got the testes with the epididymis on it, and then the vas deferens comes off the epididymis, and it's going to go up the spermatic cord to carry the sperm up. Now, what about the hormones? Well, the hormones are taken in the blood vessels. So obviously, testosterone is released by the cells that are kind of in the nooks and crannies, and it'll be carried up into the bloodstream to your body. Now, beautiful histological view of a testes. So you see the testes itself, and then you can see the epididymis is glommed on the side like that. And you can't see in this particular view, but there's going to be little ducts that are carrying all the sperm made by all those meters and meters of seminiferous tubules. All that product, the sperm, is getting moved into the epididymis, where the sperm is going to mature. And eventually the ductus deferens will carry the sperm up towards the body. So here's this tunic albuginea, and if you take a look, you look at testes pulled out of a body, you see that they're white and shiny and tough, real tough capsule. So that'll be the tunica albuginea, alba white, right there. And just beneath it, just tube city, tons and tons of tubes producing sperm. Yeah, you can see it's in little lobes, little sections. So there's connective tissue sections separating the lobes. All right, and then let's give a name to those cells in those nooks and crannies. Interstitial cells. That's that's the easy name, like they're in the interstitium. But I've been putting Leydig because that's just classically what's been used to name these cells. But these interstitial cells are going to be making the testosterone, and I'll show you some pictures of them. And then the seminiferous tubules are going to be making the sperm. Wow, look at that, each tubule. I heard 50, 70 centimeters. So we're talking about, oh my God, almost 900 meters of tubes. So that can produce a lot of sperm, a lot of product. 900 meters. Wow, seminiferous tubules, all of them slowly producing sperm constantly. Yeah. Look at that seminiferous tubule. See in the middle all the sperm being produced, and they're immature, and you can look more detail on how they mature, but they go from the cells on the outside are going to be the stem cells that are going to be always there, and they're going to be always dividing and producing new sperm. So if you look in this seminiferous tubule here, and here's the lumen in the middle, so here's some old sperm. You see on the outside will be these cells are going to be the stem cells, are going to make the sperm. Then there's these helper cells, these sustentacular cells. They often go the whole distance here. But they're going to help this whole process. So they're kind of, they hold and nourish and get rid of waste from the developing sperm as it comes up. And there's a whole system. The outside, you got spermatogonia to spermatids to mature sperm. So they develop from the outside of the tube to the inside. And these sustentacular cells, called Sertoli cells too, are going to be helpful in assisting in making the sperm as it comes up. Then, of course, you got to move the sperm along, and you're going to have these cells that will contract. So there'll be layers of cells that contract. So you just slowly, as the sperm are developed, they move to the inside, then they're moved down this tube towards the epididymis. Beautiful. I'll show you some pictures here. Oh, look at that. Oh, so yeah, this is a seminiferous tubule. And you can see in the middle, I see almost little hairs, like the little tails of the sperm being produced, all the dark staining nuclei around there. And then there'll be cells here, these interstitial cells here. And those interstitial cells, you can see, be making the testosterone. All right, so these cells I talked about that were the ones that nourish and protect and get rid of waste are these sustentacular cells. And they're big, and they do the work. They protect your stem cells that are making your sperm, which is your reason for living, right? It's passing on your genes. And interestingly, remember your blood-brain barrier? You have a blood-testes barrier too. What it's protecting these your stem cells, which are so important for your reproduction, but it also protects them from your immune system, because you produce sperm, which are going to be unique haploid cells. They have a unique protein code on them that you may attack. You might want to attack these. And so your immune system is kept away from these newly developing sperm, which are kind of unique cells that your immune system may recognize as different. So before puberty, the stem cells just sit there. They're just wait. And under the influence of hormones, your testes are maturing. The apparatus is ramping up for you to make sperm for the next 90 years, right? Men can produce sperm onto old age, as opposed to women through menopause. We'll talk more about that. So on the outside, you have the stem cells. They're dividing. They always leave enough on the outside to replenish themselves, but then the daughter cells will move inward. They move inward, and as they move inward, they start developing into sperm. They become primary, secondary spermatocytes, and then spermatids, and then finally sperm. So they go through this whole series. It's called spermatogenesis. Genesis is like the Bible creation, so sperm creating, spermatogenesis, happens in the seminiferous tubules from stem cells on the outside that will divide and form these, through meiosis actually, to form these haploid gametes or sex cells that come up. It takes about 65, 75 days for this process to go from the outside to the inside. And I put it in here, male contraception. I don't know if I can talk much about that, but a male pill has societal issues, has psychological issues, but one chemical issue is that you can see you're not safe. Sperm takes so long to be produced that if you take the pill, you can prevent ovulation, maybe wait a month, but you'd have to wait months to be sure, you weren't making the sperm. So it's a little more complication when you look at making a male birth control pill. And looking at this picture, you can see here that the sperm at this end don't look like normal sperm, look more like tadpoles, kind of fat, and the tail isn't slender anymore. So, but they're continuing their process of developing as they're going to move along the seminiferous tubule, and then they get to the epididymis. They'll gain a little bit of motion, but they really start swimming when they're mixed with other fluids from the semen. That really gets them going. They start their swimming. So beautiful picture here. You can take a look. These big cells here will be the sustentacular cells, the cells that are protecting the important ones. You can see here, see all the mitosis taking place, see the nuclei. You can see those. And they're going to be dividing, and by now they're haploid, moving out. And finally, you see these little slender-headed ones, and those will be on their way to becoming sperm by that time. So yeah, development from the outside in. And don't forget there's a blood-testes barrier that protects these sperm from being attacked and from getting noxious chemicals from your system. Here's a sperm. So yeah, your book talks about male infertility, how they can test a sample of sperm in look at a computer, see how they swim, whether they're abnormally shaped. So they look at morphology, how they're shaped, and how well they swim to see, how fertile a male is. If they're having problems, they can get this tested. And then a sperm count. They look at how many sperm per milliliter. There's a kind of a threshold. You only need one, but when you have a low sperm count, it's just less likely you get one that's going to find an egg. But you see a head region up here, a light color, the head region. And we're going to see at the tip, they're going to have this sac of enzymes. Acrosome. A bunch of enzymes up there. It's like a tip of a warhead, and when it's going to contact the egg, you need those enzymes for it to dissolve this kind of a coater on the egg so that the sperm can penetrate and put its DNA in there. This mid piece, you see tons of mitochondria because all kinds of energy, so it can flap this tail for days. And then the beautiful tail, which will propel the sperm. Yeah, and in the semen, there will be sugars, fructose and some sugars that were given off that will help provide the energy for the mitochondria in this mid-region to help the sperm keep swimming. Another view. Beautiful. You can see, interesting that the mitochondria in the mid-piece are pretty unique, pretty cool. They kind of spiral around because you need that mitochondria to get the ATP to power the flagella. So the flagella will move the sperm forward. And the head has the important warhead or cargo. It has the DNA in it, and it's got some enzymes at the top to help break through. But it needs some energy in the environment because there's not a lot of fat on the sperm, right? It can't store a lot of energy for this trip. So the semen includes nutrition for it. There's a sperm swimming there. All right, here's some of these interstitial cells, like I showed you before. They'll be in the nooks and crannies, and they're going to be producing testosterone, even from immediately. They produce testosterone. You also produce some androgens. Remember where else in your body? Both males and females? Adrenal glands, right? So you produce a small amount there. Just another view. So this is the seminiferous tubule. This is where all the action was, where the sperm are being produced. But these interstitial cells are the ones that are going to be producing the hormones. And then some of these hormones that we talked about, the beginning of the semester in the endocrine system, the ones important here for the gonads, follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone, right? And they're going to be released, and especially follicle stimulating hormone is going to travel in the bloodstream and cause the cells in the seminiferous tubules to start dividing to produce sperm. Yeah. And then the Leydig cells will be tickled to release testosterone into the blood as well. And this is from your book. Looking at it again, remember, we're talking anterior pituitary gland that secretes the FSH and LH, reaches the testes. Look at that, gets the sperm going. LH really going to get those interstitial cells to make your androgens like testosterone. Those are released into the bloodstream. So even with a vasectomy, you cut the vas deferens, the blood still goes. So you still make testosterone. If you have castration, you remove the ball, testes, you're not going to make testosterone down there, maybe just small amounts. But with a vasectomy, you just stop the sperm, but the hormones still continue. Yeah, you can see under the influence of testosterone, it really peaks at puberty, increased muscular growth, hair, reproductive organs are all getting bigger. It affects your larynx development, so your voice starts changing as you go through puberty, and influences the skin, not only the hair, but you often get acne, overproduction of sebaceous glands. Everything involved with hormones. All right. So we'll talk about eggs and how few eggs, 1 a month, you make a lot of sperm. Remember that? I'm talking about 900 meters of tubes. So as many sperm as there are people in the United States every single day. And producing the seminiferous tubules, they go through that reedy testes, remember that little complex area, into that epididymis. So this is the testes. Just one more time. The epididymis is glommed on there. And this will be the duct that carries the sperm up. And again, for the anatomy, remember this duct, along with muscles and blood vessels, is the spermatic cord, the whole thing that comes down. So the epididymis, often talk about, it's where it matures, and you'll store it there until you need it. So there'll be a bunch of sperm in the epididymis, and then there's smooth muscle that will move it up when you need it. So sperm can live, again, they can live for well, maybe you don't know, I'm telling you, they can live for weeks there. And they survive kind of suspended animation. They're not moving, they're just kind of, they can move a little bit, but not much. And then once they're put in the female reproductive tract, they can still live for days. So you can get pregnant if you have sex, not just on the day of ovulation, but in that area, a few days around on either side. So they can live for days outside the body, as long as they're kept warm and some nourishment, as in the female reproductive tract. And just to complete our picture, you can store sperm, keep it in a super cold freezer for decades. We don't know how long exactly you can store it for, so you can keep it there as well. And the swimming sperm, the swimming of them, usually doesn't happen until it's going to be mixed with the other fluid and semen, then it really starts swimming. And we'll see, even swimming by itself, people think, oh, I learned the sperm swim up the oviduct to find the egg. They swim somewhat, and at the end is kind of important, but they need cilia, muscular motion, we think, to move them up. If they had to swim the whole way, it's way too far for a microscopic sperm. Just throw that out there. All right, a beautiful view, looking at the whole testes. You can see it in different sections. All those tubes are seminiferous tubules. Beautiful. And glommed on the side is this epididymis. It kind of comes off the side. And that's where all the sperm will come to mature. And here's a testes pre-puberty. There's not even a lumen, a hole in the middle. It's just the cells are there. You've got all the stem cells are going to make the sperm, but they just wait. They wait until they're influenced by hormones. Then the tubules get bigger. They get a duct. Everyone starts going. All right. I mentioned before, you can eat testes. And I have had turkey fries, I will admit. I haven't had the goat testes, anything like that. But this also shows that tunica albuginea, that kind of white, both of them do that white toughness on it. The inside will look softer little tubes. All right, we have another lecture I'll do next. We'll finish off the male reproductive system and then a couple on the female. All right.